Friends, hello everyone. The year 2025 has probably been the most intense of the entire war in terms of discussions about a possible truce. This topic is being discussed at international summits, in the media, and on social networks. But what's most interesting is how those who actually manage the country's defense feel about this, or who have recently been in charge of it. Generals who are responsible every day for the lives of thousands of people on the front line. Today, we will take a detailed look at what three key figures have to say about the truce, its conditions, and its consequences. Valerii Zaluzhnyi, Kyrylo Budanov, and Andriy Biletskyi. Their views sometimes overlap, and sometimes they differ drastically. From predictions of a frozen conflict to warnings about internal strife and calls for immediate army reform, let's analyze how their opinions have changed over the past year and what conclusions we can draw together right now. But first, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Don't forget to leave a like and also leave a comment. This is very important for the growth of our community. And so, as not to waste your time, let's get started right away. So we'll begin with the person who, until February 2024, was directly in charge of all of Ukraine's defense and is now the ambassador to the United Kingdom. His authority is extremely high, and according to sociological data, he is one of only two public figures whose trust rating exceeds the level of distrust. His view on how the war should end was formed a long time ago, but it was only this summer that we heard specific details. In July 2025, that is, this year, Zaluzhnyi stated that the old type of war had already ended back in December 2023, and that from 2024, a war of attrition had begun. This war could drag on for years, or even decades, if long-term defense is not taken care of. He was the first among high-ranking officials to so clearly outline the new, I would say, grim reality. And then in November, he gave a more specific forecast in his own op-ed column. He called the most likely scenario not peace, but a frozen conflict for several years. It will be a pause that both sides will use to prepare for a new round of confrontation, he wrote. Why not peace? That question immediately arises. Because, in Zaluzhny's opinion, the Kremlin will not agree to anything except the complete defeat of Ukraine or significant concessions from our side. For him, a true victory would only be the collapse of the Russian Empire, for Zaluzhny that is, and a defeat would be complete occupation. Everything else is just a continuation of the war. But even such a frozen pause gives a chance for reforms and for recovery. Now, friends, his loudest warning, which was voiced in December, that is this month, not so long ago, we made a separate episode about it. At a forum dedicated to veterans, Zaluzhny spoke not about an external enemy, but about an internal threat. He noted that after the war, about 1 million defenders may return home who will become veterans. And if the state does not provide them with proper reintegration, jobs, housing, and psychological support, we are facing serious social upheavals. Let's quote Zaluzhny. People with combat experience and weapons in their hands become vulnerable to all sorts of provocations. Neglecting adaptation can lead to an increase in crime, political destabilization, and even civil war. And this, friends, is not just talk. He draws historical parallels with the turbulent 1990s after the Afghan war. But even more important is that Zaluzhny directly says, look, this topic is already starting to be manipulated today. In Ukraine, according to him, an artificial struggle is being created between non-existent parties, the military, and veterans in order to divide society even before the war ends. Veterans may become hostages of political games. So, the evolution of Zaluzhny's thinking. Such is the evolution from stating a protracted war of attrition through a forecast of a freeze to a sharp warning about internal risks and political manipulation. After the truce, he is essentially looking to the future and sees threats that go far beyond the front line. The next figure in our analysis is the person on whom all the country's intelligence information depends. And, as you know, special military operations as well. And perhaps it was Kyrylo Budanov who showed the most dramatic changes in forecasts over the past year. Back at the beginning of February this year, 2025, his tone was even, to some extent, optimistic, because in an interview at that time, he stated that despite the diametrically opposed positions of the sides, he believed that by the end of this year, 2025, it would be possible to achieve a ceasefire. Let's quote him. I think it will happen. Why? Because in his opinion, Russia needs a break. And if by 2026 it does not get out of the war, it will forever lose its chance at global leadership, remaining only a regional power. But already, friends, a week later, at the end of February, Mr. Budanov clarified his opinion, essentially separating the concepts of peace and truce. He says that reaching a truce quickly is, in principle, realistic. Reaching peace quickly. No, said Budanov. In other words, a ceasefire is possible, but it would only be a pause, not a final settlement. By July, his position became even more categorical regarding the timeline. In an interview with Bloomberg, he stated that a truce should be reached as soon as possible, well before the end of the year, and that only 3 parties are needed for this. These are Ukraine, Russia, and the United States. But in the fall, already in October, Budanov's tone changed noticeably again. He spoke out, not about a quick result, but about incredibly difficult conditions. According to him, a truce is only possible if a number of factors coincide simultaneously within Ukraine, within Russia, and in the allied countries. He says this: only the precise combination of these elements at the planned moment will yield results. Otherwise, the war will continue, he said. Moreover, Budanov made it clear that the US, like any other country, acts primarily in its own interests, America first and foremost. So what do we see? Having gone the path from believing in a ceasefire by the end of the year, from calls for the fastest possible agreements to acknowledging the extreme complexity and dependence on external factors. In other words, his opinion is very flexible and responds to changes in geopolitics, especially to the position of the United States. And the main conclusion from Budanov: even if a truce does happen, it will only be a temporary solution, which must be based on cold calculation and a combination of many factors. And finally, friends, a perspective from the front itself, from the person who commands one of the strike corps, the Third Corps, the perspective of Andriy Biletskyi. This is probably the most pragmatic position, focused on internal problems, position. Because back on January 25th, he warned about the danger that, in principle, even the discussion itself poses of a truce. He said that public expectation of a quick ceasefire demotivates the fighters and can lead to rash decisions by commanders and therefore to even greater losses. In this, by the way, he is absolutely right, and in his opinion, it is the enemy who is deliberately fueling this topic in the information space. In September, Biletskyi outlined his formula more clearly. He said that the only and shortest path to a truce is Ukraine's military victories at the front. In other words, he openly says that he doesn't pay much attention to truce scenarios because they distract him from his main work. That is his position, not to wait for diplomacy, but to create new facts on the battlefield. And just this December, literally a few days ago, in a major article for The Economist, Biletskyi made his main point. He stated that regardless of whether there is a truce or not, the Ukrainian army must urgently change. And he called 2025 the year of military hangover after the intoxication of the first victories. And 2026 should become the year of sober reform, he says. What is the essence of the reform according to Biletskyi? There are 3 key points. The first is quality basic training instead of quantity, a radically different quality of soldiers. And there he gives specific numbers, saying that in half a year, thousands of instructors can be trained, who will then graduate tens of thousands of truly trained soldiers every month. The second aspect is a strong corps of sergeants, because without it, increasing the size of the army only increases losses. That's also an absolutely sound idea. Third, recertification. Paper generals. Probably what is most needed right now, Biletskyi says, is to give a path forward to young, experienced officers who have grown since 2014 and are now performing the duties of senior commanders. So his main point is this: technology, weapons, drones, these are important, but in the end, it's people who make all the difference. And while society debates the terms of a truce, the army, meanwhile, must be reformed here and now, because the survival of the state depends on it in any scenario. So, friends, what conclusions can we draw from this? From this immersion, so to speak, into the thoughts and positions of the 3 generals. First of all, none of them sees a truce in 1925 to 26 as a final peace. For Zaluzhnyi, it's a freeze. For Budanov, it's a temporary ceasefire. For Biletskyi, a potential operational pause. All of them see this as just another stage in the confrontation. Secondly, all of them, each from their own perspective, warn about the incredible complexity. Not only the achievements, but also the consequences of such a pause. Zaluzhnyi is alarmed by internal conflicts, Budanov by external conditions, and Biletskyi by the army's complacency. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, all 3 agree on one thing. Ukraine's future depends not on signatures on paper, but on what we are doing inside the country right now. Whether it's building a support system for millions of veterans, as Zaluzhnyi envisions preparing for difficult negotiations, as Budanov believes, or reforming the army, as Biletskyi persistently demands from us. The war has changed, friends. The war has become a war of attrition, a war of resources, not only military, but also economic, social, and human. And the thoughts of our generals clearly demonstrate one thing: the next round, whether on the battlefield, at the negotiating table, or in the country's political arena, will be won by those who prepare for it best, starting today. Thank you, friends. Stay tuned to this channel, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think about it, about these kinds of forecasts of 3 Ukrainian generals. Take care of yourselves and see you soon.